Hello, and thank you for joining us today. We are going to talk about identifying, developing, and managing great talent. Done well, this can be a real game changer. Next slide, please. Okay, my name is David Gabor. I am a partner with the Wagner Law Group and practice in the area of human resources and employment law. My focus is on helping companies create policies and procedures and training on a host of topics, including harassment. The goal is to create a great program that keeps the companies compliant while also making it a great place to work. I also handle affirmative action plans, equal pay audits, and litigation involving wage and hour discrimination and harassment. Enough about me. Let's talk about my colleagues. I am so very fortunate and honored to have the opportunity to work with Amanda Scott and Kim Svoboda, two highly respected professionals. Let's talk a bit about them for a moment. Amanda heads Solution Harbor, a national recruiting firm. She brings more than 15 years of recruiting experience to the table. Amanda works with businesses to help them identify and hire key employees who will drive positive change at their companies. Her focus is on filling positions ranging from management to the executive level in operations, accounting, and sales. She has an unsurpassed knowledge and familiarity with the job market that allows her to make ideal employment matches and business connections. One of the things that separates her from others in her field is her ability to listen to her clients in order to best understand their needs, to help them to identify the skills and characteristics so that they can make great hiring decisions. Kim heads Aspiration Catalyst, where she brings more than 25 years of experience helping build high-performing teams and developing exemplary leaders. Her focus is on leadership, sales, marketing, and helping women advance in their careers. Kim is accredited by the International Coach Federation and is a Gallup Certified Strengths Coach. She also serves on the board of the BBB of Chicago and Northern Illinois Executive Committee as Vice Chair of the Board of Directors and on strategic planning committees. She is especially helpful when a business is stagnant, employee turnover is high, performance needs to improve, diversity and inclusion is lacking, and when teamwork can be improved. She is also an asset when the C-suite is looking to invest in its people and provide development in a number of disciplines. As you can see, Amanda and Kim bring valuable insight to our discussion about identifying, developing, and managing great talent. Please feel free to email any of us after the program with questions that you have, or if you would like to receive a copy of the slides. We are all extremely passionate about our work, so it would be by no means an intrusion or imposition if you reach out to us. Kim, can you start us off?
I would love to. And David, thank you so much for that introduction. I appreciate it. And I am so grateful to be on the session today with you and Amanda, my esteemed colleagues. So let's dive into content here. So the situation today in our environment is it's good news and it's bad news. And the good news is this, right? The good news is that unemployment rates are at record lows, which is fantastic. The bad news is that it's a lot harder now to navigate this landscape of identifying, developing, and managing the most valuable part of our businesses. It's more difficult. And so in order to make it a more successful endeavor, we're here, Amanda, David, and I, to share strategies with you on how you can ensure that you secure the best talent and keep them performing on a continual trajectory of growth for years to come. I am having difficulty advancing the slides, so if someone could help me with that. All right, awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, so the challenges that we're faced with are high turnover, disengaged employees, underperformance, and bias. So let's dive into each of those just a bit. So turnover, why do people leave? Why do people leave your organization? Well, it could be for a bigger paycheck. Maybe they're looking to get a little bit more money or maybe a bigger title. It might be that they've got a bad boss. In fact, oftentimes that's what that is, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. They might think that their employer doesn't care about them or doesn't value their opinion, or maybe they were a bad hire to begin with. You know, maybe there wasn't enough time spent up front for you to truly find the best talent pool to select your candidate from. I think, you know, one of the things that that we should be thoughtful of in terms of when people leave is how much it costs us. It's quite expensive. And in fact, SHRM posted the Society of Human Resource Management posted some recent results that said 6 to 9 months of an employee's salary is the cost it takes to locate and train their replacement, which is absolutely expensive, right, for any business. So these disengaged employees, right, we've also got the challenge where maybe they're showing up physically to work but are mentally checked out. A few bad apples can seriously undermine the culture and productivity of the entire team and or company, and they cost businesses upwards of $500 billion, according to Gallup. So this underperformance, right, underperformance is another challenge where they maybe are failing to perform the duties of the role, or at least up to standard, and everybody else has to pick up the slack, or worse, it just doesn't happen at all. And then the last challenge, and there's many more, right, we're highlighting 4 today, but, you know, bias. We see potential in people that are like ourselves, which may or may not be a good thing, right? I think most of the studies show that diversity actually it should be the goal in terms of building a high-performing team. But if we look at, right, the EEOC recent data on managers and senior executives, 86% are white and 70% are male. So we still have a lot of work to do in this bias arena. The other thing that happens is if the employees do get hired at all, 34% of them are actually withholding their ideas because they don't feel like it's a safe environment for them to share. And 48% of them are keeping their eye open for the next great opportunity around the corner. So let's talk about our opportunities. What can we do to turn these challenges around and make lemons into lemonade for each of our organizations? So number one, how do we find those A players? Well, I'm so excited to have Amanda on the call because she's going to share a lot of ideas on how to do this. But we know that when we have A players on our teams, they are smart, they're observant, they shape their job description, they're reliable, they're aligned with the goals of the organization. And I thought I would share a quick example of a client that I am working with who hired a new director of sales to their team. This new player is an A player for sure. And what has happened is she's brought strategy, she's brought levels of performance to the team that they had not been able to achieve in the past. So not only did she bring her A game and her performance is great, but she raised the bar for every single person on that team, and they're all performing at a higher level. So this is a great opportunity for all of us. Highly engaged teams is another great opportunity where they impact all the metrics: revenue, profitability, customer engagement. They achieve great things. And highly engaged teams are talent magnets. Everybody wants to be part of it. So how do we do that in our organizations? We're going to talk about that today. And cultural excellence is absolutely critical. And there's, you know, the statements out there from Peter Drucker about culture eating strategy for breakfast. Someone else has written a book about how culture eats strategy for lunch. But the deal is this: when everybody's clear on the mission and pulling together to win the day, the week, the month, the strategy gets executed and success happens. So those are the items that we're going to be diving into further. And I'm happy now to pass on the baton to Amanda to talk about identifying these great A players and building these high-performing teams. Amanda?
Awesome. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Well, David, thanks so much for the nice introduction to each of us. It's great to be working with you both. And Kim, thanks for the great introduction to our program. So like Kimberly was talking about, we have a really challenging employment situation for employers. People are employed and they're happily employed in many cases. So a big issue these days is finding the right talent to interview in the first place. And although this is another discussion, I think proactive recruiting is the key. So whether you're using a headhunter or an internal resource at your company to identify candidates, I think proactive recruiting, in other words, going actively after candidates that you want, is really the key. So once you have identified some good candidates, you want to make sure you interview them appropriately to really determine if they're the right fit for your organization. May I have the next slide? So I think one of the biggest issues these days when it comes to an interview, and by the way, I think the interview is the first step in really making a good hire. If you can improve your interview process, you can improve your ability to attract and retain the right employee the first time. Like Kim talked about, the cost of turnover is astronomical. So if we can hire the right person first, then that's really the key. So I think the thing to keep in mind whenever you're interviewing is to focus on what are the objectives of the job that we're hiring for and what is our company culture. Those are kind of the two questions that you want to ask yourself. Is this person capable of achieving our objectives, and do they match our culture? I think the largest mistake that companies make these days is focusing too much on what the person has done in the past. Those things are certainly important if you need certain certifications and education levels and experience levels. Those things are important. But I think the kind of old style of interviewing of focusing on the candidate's resume is a mistake. I think you need to go over the resume in order to understand their background, but really need to come up with some questions to ask about whether they can accomplish the goals you're trying to achieve. I think that you need to put together a good job description that discusses these objectives and goals, and there should be a timeline as well. So I'll give some examples throughout my part of the presentation. Say you were hiring a director of operations for a manufacturing company. Some of the job description could include things like tightening our supply chain up within 1 year, reducing turnover by 10% in the first 2 years. So you want to put actualized goals and objectives in the job description. You also want the job description to be engaging. It sounds a bit cheesy, but saying things like we have a fun, engaging environment where you can really come and thrive and build your career, those types of things are attractive to candidates. So once you have an effective job description that lists out the objectives and specific tasks of the job, you want to come up with the objectives, competencies, and values. Objectives are some of those things I talked about, some of the goals with a timeline. The competencies are things that are sort of black and white, 10 years of experience, MBA, experience working with so-and-so software, etc. Values are things that are kind of cultural or personality. So if this so-called manufacturing company we're talking about, if it's a very collaborative environment, you'd want someone collaborative. If it's an organization that's very jovial and likes to do fun things together after work, or perhaps the organization will participate in fundraising events or walks or different things like that, maybe jovial or engaging would be a good value. So you want to make sure to really think about your organization and what kind of personality traits stand out and what are necessary in this person. Next slide, please. So you want to use those 3 areas to come up with what I call a scorecard. It's a very simple 4-part document. The first section should be mission. So in the scenario I was talking about, the mission for this director of operations is to improve our supply chain, reduce turnover, and effectively run our production. The outcomes could be some of those examples that I listed. It could also be things like, attend our training in New York during month 1, or during month 3, improve our shipping costs, things like that. And then the competencies, like I mentioned, each of those kind of hard skills or experience levels that you're looking for, and then values and qualities. So you really should use this scorecard for each interview. So you want to come up with an effective interview process, and you want to make sure you use this for each and every candidate that you interview. It's really important to interview all of the candidates in the same way so you get the same information from each candidate, and you can compare the results of each candidate fairly. This really helps to avoid some of those biases. Sometimes when we're interviewing, we get excited about a candidate. Maybe their kid goes to our kid's school, or we like the same football team, and we get off topic and start talking about those things and think to ourselves, well, this guy is a fan of the same football team as me, so he must have the same beliefs. Well, that's fun and can be interesting, but you want to make sure to stick to your interview process. So the interview process, you should have a number of different formats. And what I mean for this director of operations is perhaps have an initial phone interview with the candidate to get a general sense of their background and personality. Then for a second interview, I think this should be kind of the bulk of the interview, where you bring the candidate in, have everyone involved in the hiring process, ask questions. You can have that split up or be kind of a group interview. And then I always think the final step of the interview should be some kind of outside interview process. What I mean by that is
hey, Amanda, before you get to that, I'm sorry, can I just offer something?
Please.
When I go to court, a lot of times the judges expect there to be a written document regarding the interview process.
Yep.
So when you do exactly what you said, when I go to court, I have a client with peace of mind, provided, however, that you also make sure that you've prepared the people who are taking notes on the interview regarding what they should and should not be recording. Every once in a while, people make comments in there about a person's race, about gender, about whether the person is attractive or pregnant or is grossly overweight or perhaps has a noticeable limp. And they make those notes, which make it kind of difficult for me down the road. So we do want to, make sure that we're consistent. The other really good point is go through all the questions, even if you feel uncomfortable going forward with that candidate, because the unsuccessful candidate may say, you know what, I only got a 10-minute interview and the other people had 30 minutes. So I'm glad you made those points. Thank you.
Absolutely. So I'll get more into kind of that final step of the interview process in a moment. So change up times of the day of the interview. If this person is a salesperson, for example, and perhaps they do most of their business in the evening, if you continue to interview them first thing in the morning, you're not going to get a good sense. Or if this is someone that's running production, for example, where everything happens in the morning, you don't want to just interview them in the evening because you may not know if they're a morning person or not. The other thing about that, a funny story I heard from a colleague, was they were interviewing a sales leader, and they interviewed him in the morning every day. And he was quite good in the morning. The final interview for them was an evening meeting. And he came and was intoxicated. So that's an extreme example, but you really want to mix up the times of days of the interviews. Again, gain several points of view to avoid some of these biases and have a consistent overview of a candidate from a number of different people. Now, I'm not saying bring in everyone in the company, but just whoever is going to be interacting on a daily basis with this employee. Again, keep the process consistent for each candidate. I just recommend that you document the process ahead of time for each candidate. And then again, utilize that scorecard. You just simply list out those points I mentioned and then have everyone have a copy at each step of the interview process, take notes, and keep those together. I think to David's point, those would be perfect to use in a court situation if you ever got to that. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so for that first interview that I spoke about, the first in-person interview, you want to go over the resume briefly. Ask each position what they did there, who they reported to, how many direct reports if it's a management position. Ask, of course, why they left each position. If any red flags come up during this section or any other section of the interview, you really want to keep pushing them to get more information. Don't walk away with a red flag from this interview. You want to, if someone said, well, I left because I didn't like my boss, well, why? How did that happen? Did you ever try to have a discussion with your boss to try and improve the situation? Ask those kinds of questions. Really just keep pushing until you get to the bottom of any issue that comes up. As far as questions, so you really want to focus your questions around what you are trying to accomplish in the job and make them situational, specific to your job. So I think a mistake is some of these canned interview questions that any savvy candidate could find on the internet. Things like, tell me a time when you had a problem with your boss, or tell me a time you had a problem with a direct report. Instead of those kinds of questions, I think you should ask situational questions based on issues you're having at your company. For example, if you're hiring a director of operations for a manufacturing company and you have a quality manager that's very good but needs some training and occasionally is inappropriate with power, in other words, is too authoritative with the employees, you could say something like, we have this quality manager and he's great, he's incredibly skilled, but he has challenges with how to utilize his authority. Can you tell us how you would deal with someone like that? So come up with situations that you're actively dealing with at your company and present that in a question to the candidate. Make them very situational based on your own situation. Again, kind of touching on some of those things David said, you want to avoid all of the illegal questions about race, pregnancy, do you have a car? Those kinds of questions are not appropriate. Ridiculous interview questions. I've had clients that have asked questions like, it's just very inappropriate, but if you were a bar of soap in a famous person's shower, who would it be? Things like that just do not, they're not telling you anything about how this person will perform in your job. You've got to keep the questions situational, appropriate, legally appropriate, as well as appropriate to the situations that you're dealing with.
Amanda, I had an interesting interview question. Oh gosh, this is probably 10 years ago, but I was interviewing with the chief operations officer of an organization, and he asked me, if you could go to lunch with any 3 people, right, famous or not famous, dead or alive, who would they be? I was a little worried about answering that question because it might actually sort of reveal like my politics or, something like that. What do you think about, is that a ridiculous interview question?
Totally ridiculous. How does that have anything to do with the job that you were interviewing for? I mean, is it fun? Can it be funny? Yes. I mean, can it reveal something about you personally? Yes. But you're right. It could reveal something about your political, religious beliefs, et cetera, which is inappropriate information to reveal in an interview and make a decision on whether you hire someone. Avoid questions that could come up with anything that is, a legal protected issue, where a question like that certainly could.
Unless of course you want to have to pay money to hire me to defend you in court.
Correct. More work for David. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so quickly on this culture. So I think the final step of an interview process needs to be away from the interview setting. Ideally, certainly if it's a management or higher position, it should be dinner. You should take the person to a restaurant. I wouldn't have any more than 3 people from the company and the candidate, and make it be very casual. Again, you have to avoid illegal interview questions, but this is a great time for the candidate to reveal if they're, how do they treat the wait staff? Do they have good table manners? Do you like them? You're hiring this person to work with every single day. Do you like this person? Can you see yourself working with them every day? It's just a really revealing step of the process. Now, if it's not a management person, you could go to coffee. If it's a lower level position and you just simply don't have time to take them to a public place, you could even go outside of your office, offer the candidate a cup of coffee and go sit outside and have a cup of coffee on a bench. Worst comes to worst, you could just even take them into your lunchroom. You just want it to be away from the formal setting of an interview. Okay, last slide, please. Can I have the next slide? Okay, so the reference check. I think the standard for reference checks has been, tell me about Joe candidate. Did Joe candidate work for you? What did he do? Did he do a good job? Would you hire him again? You know, those questions can be helpful, but again, that's not keeping in mind our goals. Can this person accomplish our goals, and are they a good cultural fit? So I think the #1 question that you can ask in a reference is, first, explain to the reference, we are hiring a director of operations. We need help with improving our supply chain, reducing turnover, improving our shipping methods, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Explain to the reference what you are trying to do, and then ask them, as I've explained this to you, do you think this candidate is a good fit? You'd be shocked how many references I've taken where I've asked the question in that way, and the reference has said to me, Joe candidate is awesome. He did everything I needed him to do. He was a great fit for our company. The job you've described to me is not a good fit for him. I do not think he would succeed in that role. So it's just a much more revealing way to do references. I think it's also a good time to describe your company culture. You know, we're a really jovial organization. We love to have lunch together. You know, people walk together on their lunch breaks and do things together. Do you think he would be a good fit for that? All right, that's it for me.
Amanda, before we jump,
Yep.
There was a comment from somebody. Does that mean we shouldn't ask what do you like to do on the weekend? What about tell me about you? Both questions could lead to areas that we should not discuss. Do you agree with that?
I mean, David, I feel like that's more of a legal question. What do you think?
I would agree with the person's comment. It doesn't have any value in the interview process, and if the person talks about their religion, their church, or things along those lines, even if they're a Met fan or a Yankee fan, in some places can't be a factor to determine whether or not to hire somebody, I would say stay clear of that. The other thing on the reference check, and we'll talk about it later, is please do not ask about salary or benefit history until an offer of employment has been made with salary.
Agreed.
All right, thank you.
So enough talk about these Mets or Yankees fans. Obviously, everyone should be a Cubs fan, right? So let's talk more about developing this talent. Amanda did a great job of helping us, right, gain some valuable tips and strategies for hiring our A-team. So now what do we do once we have them? Next slide, please. So starting with talent, and this is a build, so if you can go ahead and just click through. So one of the things that Gallup measures, right, every year is the state of the workplace, the workforce. And the state of the U.S. workforce actually is improving in engagement, which is really exciting. This is something that actually has been pretty stagnant over the last almost 20 years. And I've got a 31% was the number that I thought it was, but it's actually 34. So it's gone up pretty significantly over the last year from the last time it was measured. So this is actually the highest in Gallup's history of reporting this data, which is wonderful, but there's still a pretty large percentage there that is vulnerable. So 66% of our talent, right, is vulnerable. And the questions that we should be thinking about in terms of who's engaged, this talent, they want to know that at work, they get the opportunity to do what they do best every day. They want to be able to bring, right, their special thing, right, whatever that might be, to the office and be able to have it utilized. They want opportunities to learn and grow, right? And they want them not just once when they started with the organization where maybe they got a great training program, but they're really looking for ongoing development. They want to keep growing. And another great test is, right, I'd recommend working here to a friend or family member. You know, I think many people would say that the best type of talent that they get are referrals, right? They are people that are already sort of bought into the organization because they know someone personally who's working for the organization and loving it. And so that's a great way to find other great talent. So if we look at the vulnerable population, right, 13% are actively disengaged, which means they are like super unhappy and they're going to bring everybody down with them. That is definitely not what we want, and we need to manage those people out of the organization. 53% of them are not engaged, and they're sort of doing the minimum. Like they're showing up, but maybe not really, you know, mentally there every day. So let's talk about the positives here. So why is this up? Why is now 34% of the workplace engaged? And there are a number of reasons, right? So companies are focused on doing more recognition, right? Recognition is up and it's in, and you should be doing it. And it's not about like big fancy programs or, you know, huge rewards or, you know, things where you have to, you know, give them lots of money. It's actually as simple as the CEO maybe writing them a quick note, or their manager saying, wow, I noticed how well you treated that customer, you know, last hour, and that was very inspiring, and I love watching you do, you know, what you do so well. You know, it could be something as simple as just a statement. Benefits have also slightly improved, so that's been a contributor to engagement. And then a lot of companies have been intentionally spending time building cultures of high development experiences, right? So providing opportunities for their people to learn and grow, which has led to high achievement. And the shift was led by the CEO and the board, right? Supported at the top level and included things like continuous company-wide communication about, right, this high investment in development. So, and that impacts your team leaders, which when they lead in new ways, in positive ways, the impact there can be very, very instrumental in shifting a culture. Next slide, please. Next slide, thank you. So it's all about the managers. And so I've got a little joke here. Which manager would you rather work for, the one on the top right or the one on the lower right? And I think maybe we would pick the one on the lower right after watching many seasons of The Office and laughing at some of the stereotypes of managers out there. And great managers matter so much. They are a part of your employee value proposition. People quit their managers more often than they quit for other reasons. And so having great managers is critically important. In fact, Gallup estimates that not engaged managers cost U.S. companies between $77 billion and $96 billion annually because of the impact on those that they manage. So when you factor in the impact of actively disengaged, those numbers jump to $398 billion annually. So this is big money, and there is absolutely a way to counteract this. So as much as people leave managers, they also stay for managers. And Gallup's research further reveals that 1 in 10 people naturally possess high talent to manage. And beyond those people, we need to invest and develop. So when these 10% are put into managerial roles, they have a strong natural ability to find the right people for the right position, right? They're really good at identifying talent, right? So exactly what Amanda does. They create a culture of clear accountability. They can inspire their employees with a compelling vision of what success looks like, what the future looks like. They coach and develop their people by focusing on their talents and strengths rather than focusing on the things that they aren't good at or the things that they need to improve all the time. Not that people get out of, they don't get to get out of not improving in their areas of weakness, but they help them manage around them, and they focus the lion's share of that development time on the things where their employees really have talent. Great managers also make decisions based on productivity, not on politics, right? They're not making decisions about, I don't know who they like best. It's more about really the facts and the data to support those decisions. And then last but not least, they build trust and dialogue with their people about both work and life outside of work once they're already in the organization, right? And respecting, obviously, boundaries. And so those are some of the things that you want to look for when you're looking for great managers. Just because someone was a high performer in an individual contributor role, I think we all know now, certainly does not always translate into great success as a manager. So you need to be looking for different criteria in terms of who's going to be leading your team. Next slide, please.
If I could, really quick,
yeah,
just from my experience, I would guess about 80% of the candidates that I pull from one job and take them to a new opportunity, when I ask, why did you consider the opportunity I've presented to you, the number one answer is, my boss and I are not seeing eye to eye. My boss has caused my career to be stagnant. My boss doesn't allow me new opportunities. So it's almost always the boss that the candidate may be somewhat engaged, but then they get an appealing approach from a recruiter and go, oh, well, maybe this manager would be better. So this is such a key area.
Yeah, thank you, Amanda. Absolutely. Thanks for highlighting that. Okay, so developing talent, right? So now you've got great managers. You're focused on developing a highly engaged team. So what do you do to further develop your talent? And one way to do that is to help them discover what their talents are. Sometimes people know what their strengths are, and sometimes they don't. Oftentimes what I find when I'm working with my clients is that they think that their unique talent is actually the same as everyone else's, and that's actually not true. In fact, right, as David mentioned, I'm a Gallup certified strengths coach, and when I do the strengths assessment with my clients, the chance of someone having the same top 5 in the same order as someone else is 1 in 33 million. So we are really unique individuals, and we bring something special and unique to our lives, but to the workplace, right, as we're discussing today. And so helping them figure out, like, what are your talents and how could we be contributing them to our workplace is a great way to help your people develop and grow, as well as get them really all in terms of your business. And so the focus on talent and strengths improves retention. By doing this, you help them uncover ways to contribute to the success of the organization. So it's not about changing their job description per se, but it's really about how can they operate right within their role in such a way where they do it the way that fits them best. So they can be authentic, they can be themselves, and do a great job delivering right on their role. You can help them invest in their talents. What we know is that when people invest in their talents, their growth is exponential. When they invest in their areas of weakness, they grow too, but it's a much smaller level because it's not their thing, likely. You know, usually what I recommend is help people manage around their weaknesses. Maybe think about it in terms of 80-20. 20% of your time is managing around weaknesses and finding maybe great partners of people that have what you don't, and you can bring them what they don't, and so together you create this great power partnership. And then take the 80% of your time, your development time, and spend that in the areas that you have talent so you can become standout. I think the other last piece, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more on the next slide too, is just this partnership opportunity within the team. What I bring is different than what you bring. If you think about David and Amanda and I, we all have different strengths and talents, and that's one of the things that led us to put this webinar together, is that we all bring something different, and by bringing it together, we create something really strong. And so when you look at your team, where are the opportunities to create a great partnership? And I've got an example from a client I worked with recently. There were 2 men on the team. They were both VPs in a sales and marketing role. And they were knocking heads. They were not getting along at all. And they really needed to work well together in order to be successful in their positions. So when they did their strengths assessment, and then we got together, we did a workshop, and the 2 of them decided to partner up and share their talents with one another. What they found was that one of them was incredibly strategic, very big picture thinker, and needed lots of facts and data whenever he was making a decision about anything. The other person was very relationship oriented. And so he didn't always need a lot of facts and data to make decisions because he focused more on the relationship he had with the other person and did he trust them. And so that was where their conflict was lying. When the relationship guy would come to the strategic guy, he'd get all kinds of questions from him like, well, have you researched this and have you looked into that and where's your data? And the guy'd be like, hey, like, don't you trust me? Well, sure enough, once they found out how each of them were wired, it was like, oh, now I know why you come to me without all the facts and data, and now I know why you get so offended when I start asking you all these questions. Now that we know this about each other, we can partner together more effectively because now we understand. So that's an example of how you can create great partnership opportunities within your team by having these conversations and helping people understand each other better. Next slide, please.
Kim, before you jump over there, a couple of my clients who had problems with diversity on affirmative action plans have created what they call universities or schools where they would partner with some people who are of diverse backgrounds and create some mentoring, some training, and get some people who really are engaged and are hardworking people to get some of the skills that they need to grow in the organizations. Have you come across that at all with any of your clients?
Oh, sure, absolutely. And I think mentorship programs are a great way to help, develop talent and help people grow further. The thing that I like about strengths, as an example, is that it is a standard language that applies to everyone in the same way, no matter what your background is, no matter what your ethnicity, your gender, and it gives us this sort of common ground or level playing field to begin from and share with each other, right, more about ourselves in a sort of non-biased, non-biased way. Okay, and so high-performing teams. So a strengths-based team is a group of imperfect but talented contributors who are valued for their strengths and need one another to realize individual and team excellence. So this is a quote from Don Clifton, the founder of the Strengths movement. So high-performing teams, they are top performers. They're 17% more productive. They have fewer safety incidences, lower absenteeism, lower turnover, higher revenue, higher profitability. And the way that they do this is because they intentionally structure their activities to maximize each other's talents. So they figure out who's great at what, and then they set up the plan so that each person can bring what they do best. High-performing teams are emotionally and psychologically engaged in their work. They care a lot about the success of the team. So it's beyond them as individuals, but it's about the group as a collective. They're highly collaborative. They work well together. They're talent magnets. People look at this team and they're like, wow, like that's amazing. How do I get to be part of that? And they have a performance orientation that achieves results consistently. So this is a great goal and something that absolutely is possible for you and for your organization. So with that, now I'm going to hand over to David to talk more about managing your talent.
Please forward to the performance evaluation slide. Thank you very much, Kim. And as you have just witnessed, Amanda and Kim bring a great deal to the table from two different perspectives. I'm going to approach this part from the perspective of an attorney, but blending what's best practices as an attorney with what's best practices for an organization. The first thing we're going to talk about would be performance evaluations. One thing I've noticed is that it should not come as a surprise when a person receives a good or bad performance evaluation. This is because management really must be a 12-month per year process. If an employee is underperforming, why wait until an annual review to address it? That means that the employee is not keeping up, and the message has been sent to others that it is all right to underperform. As you heard Kim talk about, people who are super unhappy or just put in the bare minimum. Do you really want to have people with that sort of approach or attitude working in your organization? You're paying them for work they're not doing. you're losing the benefit and the profit off that work, and they really become a poison in the department. And the second thing is that in any relationship, it is important to identify expectations. Make it clear, and this is something that Amanda touched on, even right at the interview process. Build it even into a description for the position. What are you going to expect from somebody? If people know what they need to do to succeed, there's a much better chance for them to achieve those results and be happy, which in turn makes the employer unhappy. It really should never be a moving target. We're going to change the expectations. Imagine the book Catch-22 by Joseph Heller, where he's got to do a certain number of runs. When he gets close to the number so that he can leave the military, they change the number, and he never quite gets there. You don't really want to be in that kind of a position. Third, managers should be providing consistent and unbiased feedback throughout the year. And a case in point, it really needs to be unbiased. You don't want to have a situation, for example, you've got 4 people who show up late to work, 1 woman and 3 men. The woman gets disciplined, the men are not disciplined. That's a feedback or discipline that comes across, at least to that female, as being biased. Fourth, be careful about having amiables doing performance evaluations or managing throughout the year. And maybe amiables avoid confrontation, and they're not going to want to jump in and be critical of somebody because it's outside their comfort zone. So if a person's an amiable, perhaps they should not be doing that task. Kim or Amanda, do you have any thoughts on that? Okay, let's jump forward then to the internal promotion. The next slide, please. The reason why this is raised is that a poor promotional decision really hurts the business in a couple of ways. And I know this has also been touched on from different perspectives by Amanda and by Kim. But when you have a poor manager, a person who is put in the position for the wrong reason, you do run into some pretty significant problems. Imagine Arthur Miller is making a decision on who to promote into a manager of sales. And Willie Loman has the best sales numbers, off the charts, great sales numbers. And Arthur Miller says, I'm going to put Willie Loman in that position. It never occurred to Arthur Miller, does Willie Loman really want to manage a team? Is he invested in that? Does he care about management, mentorship, leadership, or does he just want to get out there and sell? At the same time, there are other people in the sales team who really want to manage, want to mentor, have been there for a long time. Maybe the numbers aren't as great, but now they've been put aside, and lo and behold, you've got Willie Loman doing a poor job managing. Now these people feel like they're in dead-end positions. Maybe they talk to someone in the company, maybe not. But when they go home, they're unhappy. And dollars to donuts. One of their friends or family members will refer them to a law firm known as Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. And you've got legal problems. So now, by making the promotion to a manager in a way that one can argue was short-sighted, you now have a team that's underperforming, you're losing talented employees, and you may be defending a lawsuit. One of the things to think about is when you want to make an internal promotion, how do you go about doing it? Is it someone high up in the company who's tapping a person on the shoulder? Is it a decision that's made by posting that we're looking to fill a management position? Anybody who's interested can apply. But that's something to think about in terms of process. All too often when it comes to my desk on the litigation side, it's oftentimes a tap on the shoulder as opposed to a selection process where you really are objectively looking for the best possible candidate. Let's jump forward. Next slide.
David, I was just going to say, that actually just happened to one of my clients, and she was very stressed out about it because I think the organization thought it was a really like a great recognition for her, right, and the hard work that she'd been putting in and the great job she'd been doing. But she didn't really want to lead other people. She was actually really happy in the role that she was in, but felt pressured and like she didn't really have a choice to turn the position down. So that's a tough situation.
Oh, that's a great point. Thank you for sharing it. So let's talk about compensation. Equal Pay Day in 2018 fell on April 10th. Equal Pay Day is a day in 2018 that women had to work to make as much as men earned in 2017. Think about that. All of January, February, and March, and then 10 days into April. That's gained a ton of attention from the federal government and a bunch of states and local governments, and has led to enacting some laws and regulations regarding equal pay. Many of those rules say things like, you cannot ask about salary and benefit history on the interview. You can't check it with references, as I mentioned earlier, until after a position has been offered with pay to somebody. They also say that you need to do audits, and we're going to talk about that in a few minutes, in order to be compliant. But what I want to talk about most importantly in the program today is why it happens. Not every time that there's a pay disparity between men and women is it the product of a conscious decision, hey, I want to pay women less, or I want to pay someone who's a minority less. Rather, it oftentimes happens because of just the way the business is being run or events that take place. For example, if there's a merger or an acquisition, company A acquires company B. The pay scales in the two companies are different, but if you've got two people after the merger who have a comparable job, comparable experience, roles, responsibility, and things like that, and the man is making $75,000 and the woman is making $50,000, then you've got a pay disparity, and that is illegal under federal and most state laws. So when there's a merger and acquisition, one of the things that needs to happen is an audit to ensure that you do not have pay disparity. Decentralization. You've got that manager we talked about earlier who's doing the performance evaluations. That person may have a bias, and it's entirely possible that they have a bias and they don't even recognize it. But sometimes they just prefer somebody who's like them, same age, gender, Cubs fan versus White Sox fans, right, Kim? Or it may be that they're just more comfortable with people of a similar background. But what happens is if in that company a pay raise is based on performance evaluations and the person who's like the manager is getting a 5 and the person who's not like the manager, maybe a different gender or race or lives on another side of town, that person's going to end up getting a 1 or a 2. So the person who gets the higher performance rating gets the bigger raise. And that goes on for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Now you people are out of whack in their pay. Missed training opportunities. What we're talking about there would be, let's make sure that when we do performance evaluations, we're using objective criteria, not an opinion, well, you know, he's working harder, he's doing a better job that way, as opposed to somebody else. And that's important to keep that in mind. When you also train, another aspect is, some companies say, you know what, we're going to get some training on some new software or a technique or a practice. We're going to make this training available at 8 a.m. on Wednesdays for the next 4 weeks. And the manager who's making that training available to employees knows full well that there are a couple of women on the team who have child care responsibilities that could not possibly get in until 9 o'clock. And the training could have been offered at any time in the morning or the afternoon to the employees, or they could have even done it online or on the weekend. But they make the training 8 o'clock in the morning. So now the candidate who's female, the employee who's female, is missing out on that training. She doesn't get a raise or promotion because she didn't take the training, and now she's disengaged. And Kim will jump all over how important it is to make sure that your employees are engaged. And let's jump over to the audits, and this is just so important. The law in the federal courts, in the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and many states say now that you really do need to do audits. It's a very important thing for employers to jump on. Audit based on gender is mandatory in some states, on race and national origin as well as gender in some other states. But it's something that you should take into consideration as something to be doing when you line up your task for 2019. And if you do audit and you do find that women, for example, are paid less than men, in states like Massachusetts, the law says you must raise the female's salary to the same level as the male, not the other way around. And I see that there was a question asked. Can you ask candidates if the salary range for a job meets their expectations? Good question. The answer is yes. You could say that we're going to pay $50,000 or in the range of $50,000 for the position. Are you interested? And if the candidate says yes, fine. If they say no, then that's fine also. But if you say a salary range, let's say we're going to pay 40 to 50, and two people are going to be hired, one's a better negotiator and that person ends up closer to 50, and the other one who's a bit quieter ends up at closer to 40, then you can run into a concern if that happens, and especially if the female is the one who's not as good at negotiating. Let's jump to the next slide, please. Okay, great, thank you. Let's pick up on perception, which is really, really important, because I think perception drives the interview process, best practices in terms of management and engagement, and in my world, perception is huge, because perception is why a lot of people, for example, have not opposed things such as harassment in the workplace. The perception is the employers don't want to hear about it. So what we want is we want to accomplish from the day we post a job that's available in a company through the last day people work there, that this is a great place to work. And the question is, what makes it a great place to work? So let's pay homage to Aretha Franklin and start with respect, R-E-S-P-E-C-T. Hey, don't worry, I'm not going to sing. Don't get nervous. But if people believe that managers respect them, then they may in turn begin to respect managers and gain trust in the company. So when I train managers, I get them to talk about their first day at their first job or their first day they worked for the given company and what they wanted from their managers. I hear what everyone has to say. Then I ask, have you done the same for the employees who report to you? That's one of those aha moments, and in training we really love the aha moments because that is fascinating. They're not doing exactly what it is that they want somebody else to do. So from day one, when a person becomes a manager or a supervisor, let's get them in their actions and their words to treat their employees with respect. Compliment people sometimes in any relationship. I don't care if you're friends or you work together or it's the person who's working security in your building when you walk in the morning. Please try very hard to show respect to your employees in your actions, positive feedback. Hey, great job. Good job on that process. But also, whenever possible, do that in private. Because if you tend to give compliments to one person, other people might get jealous, and we don't want to have that happen. Don't assume that just because you haven't criticized them that they are okay. You know, because if you give positive feedback, you get a good result. And you also want to be consistent. Like I said earlier, we don't want to fall into the Joseph Heller trap of being a moving target. Be consistent in your expectations, in what you give in terms of work assignments, in the feedback that you're giving people. The last point on this is the relationship between HR and managers is critical for the success of a company. Managers should rely more on HR as a great resource to give them the tools they can use to manage the employees, and by developing that relationship, you have a much better chance for a successful employer-employee relationship, because very simply, if the employees feel respect, if the employees feel that the needs of the company are being met, if they feel that they're doing what's expected of them and they're performing at a high level on a day in and day out basis, then they're going to be engaged, and you're going to minimize that risk of a dispute, of a misunderstanding, of a complaint, of litigation. The only one who suffers if that happens will be the guys over at Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. So next slide, please, and I'm going to turn it back to you, Kim.
All right, thank you so much. And I love the last statement that you made there, David, around being a great partner with HR. I think that that is critical, and I can speak from personal experience on that. When I was leading large teams at Fortune 500 companies, HR had a seat at my table. They were part of my leadership team and a critical part of the success of the organization. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. We so appreciate your time. If you have further questions for Amanda, David, or myself, our email addresses are displayed on the slide, so please feel free to email us with questions, ideas, or just to continue the conversation. I really appreciate, Amanda, your expertise around hiring and helping us find our A players, and finding great hires that are going to be with us for the long haul. And David, your expertise around how to make sure that we keep ourselves out of, out of litigation and into, in the great place of having employees that are happy, that are in the right roles, and that are performing well, leaders that are leading effectively, and really helping organizations achieve great success. Anything else you two want to add?
Thank you very much, both of you.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.